Welcome back to another episode of A Gift from Adversity. My name is Juri Love. I'm your host. Today we are recording episode 145. Before I introduce our guest, I want to introduce my book, which is the same title as this podcast, A Gift from Adversity, which is available on Amazon. If you search A Gift from Adversity by Juri, Juri, Love, is there. Subtitle of this book is Overcoming Sexual Abuse, Domestic Violence, Bullying, and Homelessness. This is a book about my life that I experienced in Japan. After I published this book in 2020, I received a lot of messages from all over the world, people sharing their adversities. So I felt compelled to create this podcast and platform where people can not only talk about the adversity, but also the tools that people use to overcome and a gift that came from it. So let's invite our guest. Hello, Heather. Thank you so much for coming to episode 145 of A Gift from Adversity.
Hi, Jerry. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. Can you tell our audience your name, where you're coming in from today, and if you have any social website that you want to promote and what you do?
Perfect. My name is Heather Albrecht, and I'm the owner and main coach behind Heather Albrecht Coaching. My website is the full name there that you see on the screen, just typed in. You can find me on Facebook, Heather Albrecht Coaching, and on Instagram, I'm _coach_Heather. And I'm coming into you guys today from Vermont, and I'm happy to be here.
For the audience that are listening to the podcast, would you mind to spell out your last name so that
Yes.
people can listen and then
Yes. It's ALB as in boy, RECHT.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So let's dive into the first question, which is the adversity. So can you tell our audience what was your adversity?
The first one that I wanted to discuss today was I experienced a mental breakdown because of burnout in 2016. And that was really the first thing that when I saw this conversation that I could have with Juri today that I wanted to talk about, because it's the beginning of everything for me. I was working in two businesses that I owned, and I had just completed working for an outside business. I had stopped doing that in November of 2015. And so this time frame when this happened was in July of 2016. I was getting ready for my very first vacation in years because I'd been building up these businesses and working a part-time job to, make ends meet in the meantime. Married to my husband and in the house that we had purchased and living with our two children who were 8 and 10 at the time. We were always kind of strapped for cash. We had a hard time making ends meet. We made it all together, and basically for the first time in as long as I could remember, the business that I had built up to this point that had allowed me to leave the part-time job was finally creating enough income that we felt like we had enough money and enough to be able to do fun things with the kids and possibly think about taking a vacation and away from home. And, sending the kids to camp was still really tight. And so we cobbled together those schedules over the summer. My in-laws would watch the kids. Sometimes I would take a week off here and there. And my husband would take a week off here and there to make it all work so that it wasn't really strapping us for cash. So this vacation that I had coming up that July of 2016 was the first time that I wouldn't be working at all. I wouldn't be working in any of my businesses or for anybody else. I was just going to be home, enjoying a nice week off with the children for the summer. And I woke up one morning and I felt horrible. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I thought I was hungover because we'd been at a party the day before, but it was a family party, lots of kids around. So I wasn't over drinking. But that was how my body felt. It was the only thing that I could put together of the feeling that I had. And I figured, okay, well, I've got one more week of work and then I've got this time off. I'll be fine the next day. So I did my day of work and I didn't feel any better. And the next morning I woke up and I still felt the same, just really brain foggy, very disconnected from my body. Couldn't figure out what it was. Knew at that point that it definitely wasn't alcohol because it'd been, 48 hours. And I went through my work week. I was a house cleaner, was the business that I had built up to be able to leave the part-time job. And I remember laying on the floor in one of my clients' homes Wednesday afternoon, just thinking, what is wrong with me? At this point, we were 3 days into feeling this way. And I knew I just had to get through the 2 clients I had Thursday and the 1 client I had Friday, and I would be able to just relax and take some time off and figure this out. Thursday, I went to work, and Thursday afternoon, my client asked me how I was doing, and she was the exact right person to ask me how I was and to get an honest answer. And at that point, I just completely lost it. I was so worried about what was wrong with me because I just felt so awful. And I just was sobbing in her kitchen. She's a family friend. She knew who she knew my mom, my mother-in-law, my husband. We were, closer than I was to a majority of my clients. And she also worked in the mental health field. So that helped a lot to be able to feel like I could open up to her. And I ended up going to the hospital to have a whole bunch of labs drawn to figure out what could possibly be wrong. Like, was my blood sugar really low? Was I, what was going on? It felt like such a physical manifestation that like it didn't seem like it could be in my head. But that's exactly what it was. I had burnt myself out to the point where my brain had just basically said, nope, you need to stop and take some time and take care of yourself and, take care of this meat sack, the meat suit that we all walk around in. And, it needs to be cared for just as much as I care for the other family members in my household. And I basically had just been putting myself at the bottom of the list for so long that my brain said enough is enough. And it was a very physical manifestation of just complete burnout.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So what happened after you went to hospital, and then did you find out any results at all? Like, what did the doctor say?
Yeah, so the labs for everything that I had done were good. I've been hypothyroid since 2005, so that seemed like a pretty obvious thing to check first because brain fog is a big component of hypothyroidism if it's not treated properly. But that was fine. And so really everything looked good. And I was referred to therapy. So I found a new therapist. And I remember my husband taking me to the appointment because I couldn't drive myself. I didn't feel comfortable driving myself. It's really hard to put into words, but I felt like a zombie. I remember sitting on the couch and just kind of like staring into space, trying to figure out like what was wrong with me. The thing going through my head constantly was everything is so much better now than it was. Like the money stress wasn't as bad as it had been for years. And, I had a schedule that I wanted. I had time off, that I could take. I had built that into my business. It felt like I had everything I wanted. Why was I feeling so awful at this point? So really it was therapy. I did therapy for a long time. I still see that therapist. She's fantastic. And I had to make some really big changes to my life. I ended up closing one of the businesses that I had started in 2012. So I'd had it for 4 years, and I basically took a lot of things off of my schedule that were geared up and already scheduled for the fall. It was a bath and body care product manufacturing business. I made, sold, wholesale, had a website, like it was the whole shebang, but it was all just me. And so that was the first thing that went, talking to my therapist. She was like, what are the benefits to this right now? And like, what is the cost, to your family, to you mentally, where is the stress coming from? And that was a big source of it. So, I ended up closing that down and basically just learning how to take care of myself a lot better.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And how long did it take you to feel okay to say drive again or function again? You mentioned about the burnt out situation, your body kind of shut down,
Mhm.
and then you just don't know why, and then your thyroid level checked out. So was it like a few weeks, a month?
Yeah, so there were lots of labs drawn, not just the thyroid. That was just the one that was kind of stood out to me. Um, Everything was good. I went on some medication. So I went back on antidepressants, which I'd been off and on them for a long time. But at this point, with like the level that this was way more extreme than anything I had experienced in the past. My issues with depression in the past had been postpartum mostly. I'd had a miscarriage in 2005 and had therapy and went on an antidepressant at that point. And then after my son, my second child, weaned from breastfeeding, I had some delayed postpartum depression at that point also, and was on antidepressants for a period of time then. But that had always been really chemically, like hormonally related. So this was the first time that I went on antidepressants that was not like straight up hormonally related. So I went on antidepressants, and that really just kind of created the space to be able to go through my thoughts and feelings and not feel so reactive from it immediately. And I think that that's really important. I think a lot of people don't do that step, or they don't see that that can be a benefit of an antidepressant medication, just to be able to like give you the space to be able to process how you're feeling and actually work through it and heal, rather than just like throwing the band-aid on. um Not that I'm against meds at any point. I feel like they have their place. People need them. So I'm a big advocate for taking advantage of those things when you need them. I was able to go back to work the following week. So I had my week off, which was my vacation. And so basically I healed. I tried to like jumpstart the healing process during that period of time. And then I went back to work pretty much right on schedule. It's hard to remember at this point. It was so long ago.
So, how did it affect your relationship with your husband or with your children? I know as a mom,
Mhm,
it's a big deal that it is such. I'm a single mom too. It's
mhm.
such a big deal. Not be perfect, but how did you deal with you having this burnt out situation that created maybe more pressure? Like, how do you remember?
Oh, that's really hard. I don't remember really how it went with the kids. They were pretty young at that point, but they definitely knew what was going on, especially the 10-year-old. Um, they knew that I wasn't feeling well and that I needed to work on feeling better. Um, my husband's very supportive. I'm very lucky in that regard. He's always been very supportive. Um, so it didn't negatively impact that relationship at all. I think if anything, it really brought to light the fact that like I was doing too much. Like I had taken on too much, and it wasn't anybody's fault except for my own. Not asking for help when I needed it, and making the time to take a break for myself when it was necessary, or regularly, like before it was actually necessary, because I think that's a big misconception, is like you don't take the break until you need it, but really you need it regularly so that it doesn't get to the point that I got to.
Completely understood. So I want to go back to postpartum depression and also miscarriage part of it. I had two
Sure.
miscarriages between the first and then second child. The
Mm,
first miscarriage I had, um, the heartbeat was low, and I was recommended to take meds to drain everything, which I
mhm,
refused. But then
mm,
the heartbeat stopped, and I remember ultrasound, and then they wanted me to wait until I come home to say the news. They wanted to make sure that I don't drive, or
mm,
they don't deliver the news before I start to drive.
yeah.
So the nurse called me after I got home. That heartbeat is completely stopped. So I
Mm,
had to do the ENC. But the second one was more dramatic. It was it's in my book as well. But the suck was growing, but nothing was inside.
mm,
So they said DNC was be scheduled next Wednesday, but then Saturday I had started miscarriage in the bathroom and lost more than 50% of blood and almost died.
oh wow.
As I had to do 3 pints of blood transfusion. Luckily, EMT came really quickly. So, how did it affect you? I know a lot of people don't want to talk about miscarriage and then don't want to talk about postpartum depression. If
Mhm.
you're open to it with sharing it with our audience, I think that would be very beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, so my miscarriages, because I actually had two also, were a long time ago at this point. My oldest is going to be 18 in 2 weeks. No, 6 weeks. So it was all quite a long time ago. The first one was considered a missed miscarriage, similar to, sounds like your first one, where I went in and I'd been having some bleeding, and they saw a heartbeat and everything was fine. So they sent me on my way to just not worry for the next few weeks. And then when I went back for my, what was supposed to be my, I think 12 or 13-week visit, they couldn't hear the heartbeat with the Doppler. So they sent me in for an ultrasound, and my husband was with me. So they did tell us everything at that point, but there was no heartbeat at that point. And they figured that because of the scan from before, they could see that there really hadn't been much growth past 8 weeks. So they figured it had been a while, but they said to me that sometimes when the brain knows the information, then the body will take care of things on its own. So they thought that perhaps now that I knew that the pregnancy was no longer viable, that I would miscarry naturally, but it didn't happen. So I ended up having to have a DNC also. Um, and then I went on and had my oldest child, who will be 18 in 6 weeks. And then after that, let's see. So we started trying for a second, and I got pregnant right away. Um, had a positive pregnancy test, and then that, like within a week or so, like before I'd even had any um, OB confirmation, I miscarried again. Um, I can't remember if I'd had a blood draw. I don't think I had. So they don't even, I don't even know if it was actually considered that in my chart or not, but I had a positive pregnancy test where there shouldn't have been one if that was the case. So that miscarriage happened naturally. It's pretty common when there's a thyroid disorder. And when I had my first one in 2005, that was when I actually got diagnosed with hypothyroidism, because that second miscarriage happened in April. And then I didn't get my next period until it was like 6 weeks, which is pretty normal after a miscarriage. But then the second one took that long again. And so, from what I understand, um, something like a pregnancy can trigger autoimmune disorders like a hypothyroid issue. And that's what we figure probably triggered mine. Because it was right after that that I was diagnosed, and it runs in my family. So I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I am now. And yeah, let's see. And then I had my second child, and after that second miscarriage.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that and openly. Everything you say is a sentence, and especially for the audio podcast listeners. But at the same time, those words were very, very heavy for the people who unfortunately had experienced miscarriage. I am sure it's like something dies literally inside of you, and it's I felt like it was one of the most devastating things, especially the first one. But the second one, I was unconscious. So I
Right.
had to like really go on a survival mode rather than thinking about the baby that died.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very scary. So it's very risky. And then DNC sometimes, if it delays, cases like mine could happen. So I just want to emphasize for listeners who may be experiencing miscarriage or maybe in a period that they're not sure. And
Mm-hmm.
then if they recommend a pill or DNC, sometimes it's very hard to accept that it's stopped, the heartbeat stopped. But you need to kind of think after, like, the fact that it is your body. And then if the baby meant to survive, they would survive. But your body comes first. And then before anything else, I think it was life learning lesson. And then not so many people again talk about this. So I did like research internet and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very, very scary.
Yeah, it is. It's scary, and it's hard to accept for sure. I remember that weekend when we had the ultrasound after the first one, and they sent me home saying that maybe now everything would catch up to itself. Um, I remember just feeling like I was like a walking graveyard, and that was the thought that I had in my head, that like I was just walking around with a dead baby inside of me, and it was just traumatizing. It was pretty horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. And then talk about postpartum depression. You said you were breastfeeding, and after the breast feeding was over, that kind of kicked in. I personally never had it,
Mhm.
luckily, but I've heard about it, and I have friends who had it, and then heard that it's very, very intense.
Yeah, it was hard for me to realize that that was what was going on at that time, especially because at the time that my son stopped breastfeeding, he was like 11 months old. So, it was pretty far after I had given birth. And I guess I think that I didn't realize that it could happen that late, after a birth. So it didn't seem like that was what was going on at first. But when I put it all together and realized that, well, we were done nursing. I knew I wasn't going to be having any more children. It just kind of all came at me at once. Having two toddlers is not an easy situation either. Um, and yeah, so that was also a really long time ago and hard for me to remember at this point. But I remember that that was a big piece of it, was just not recognizing that it could happen at that point. And, when you're talking about something that's hormonal or hormonally driven, of course it's possible right after you discontinue nursing, because your hormones are still completely in flux and all over the place at that point.
And then did you diagnose yourself or somebody diagnosed you?
I saw my PCP and they sent me back to therapy, and at that point I went back to seeing the person that I had seen after the first miscarriage. So that was helpful. She knew who I was, and knew some of my personal stories, so that I think all probably played into things for me. But yeah, it was. I don't remember a whole lot about that phase of life at that point, because that was 2009, so a significant period of time ago.
Well, thank you so much. It's very important to me, and then I'm sure to some of the audience, that
Mm-hmm.
these are the conversations that we usually don't like have, and then
Yeah.
we usually um feel kind of guilty in a way sometimes to talk about. Um, so I really appreciate you sharing your personal experiences, and I just want to also highlight that these are the conversations that has a lot of stigma around it, especially miscarriage or postpartum depression and burnout. Like a lot of times it's getting better, but especially like in Japan where I come from, if you say you see a therapist, then you might lose a job. It's a big stigma. They might think you're weak. They might
Mhm.
think that you are not capable or independent. So those are the stigmas. I think it's definitely getting less. But do you feel stigma around you or rather supported?
I think, well, that's a tricky one. I know. So when I had the miscarriages, it was difficult because I was employed outside of my own personal businesses. And in the US, which I'm sure you know because you live here now, it's you don't have to tell your employer everything that's happening, but when you're missing time, it starts to make you not look like a reliable employee. And I went through a lot of that when I had small kids. I worked for a large corporation at that point, and when you were missing time for doctor's appointments, they they were not very friendly about that, needing to take care of your children if that was the case. And small kids get sick a lot, and daycare won't take them when they're sick, and school doesn't want them when they're sick either. So you have to stay home. Like one parent has to be around to take care of the kids, or some other caregiver. And my in-laws are the closest, and they helped out a significant amount with our kids. But it's especially in last minute situations like that, but we didn't want to be getting them sick. And at the time when the kids were super young and getting ill a lot, my mother-in-law was taking care of her mom, who was a cancer patient, and we didn't want her to be sick and then unable to go and help her mom. So that was a big part of things also. And so when it makes you look unreliable as an employee, that's really difficult. um in 2016, I was my own boss, and so that was a little bit different, but I was newly self-employed. And so making myself be a reliable employee was a big part of, or a reliable contractor for my clients was very important to me, because I wanted to have a secure position with them. And so that was tricky in its own right, but luckily I had more control over my schedule, so I was able to put my time in at different times, and make sure that my appointments happened when I wasn't working. But that's a big part of it too. And then we haven't really touched on this yet, but it was a part of what I wanted to talk to you about today. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2022. And so at that point, I was still self-employed through my house cleaning business. And at that time, I was 3 years into my financial coaching practice. Um, so I had lots of clients that I had to keep happy, and was dealing with this. And when you were talking about the nurses calling you from home, wanting you to be home safe when you got the news about your first miscarriage, that really hit home for me because I went to my mammogram and ultrasound, my diagnostic appointment on my own because it was actually my second one that I'd had. I'd had a mammogram when I was 33 because of a lump that I found, and in this one I was 38, and I thought, oh, it's just going to be the same thing. It's going to be fine, and I know what I'm doing, so I don't need to have anybody holding my hand this time. That was a big mistake because I got the information in that appointment that I needed to have a biopsy and that the radiation or radiologist was like 99% sure that I had breast cancer. And they just tell you that news and you're supposed to leave the hospital by yourself. And I remember driving home thinking, oh my God, I can't believe they just let you leave. Like after you have this information. And, of course I could have tried to call someone, but my husband and the kids were at home and I didn't want to call them crying, and I couldn't go home in the state that I was in at that point. Like I knew I needed to like calm my nervous system down and gather my thoughts and process some of this before I went home and saw my then teenagers, because at that point they were 13 and 15. Sounds right. I might be misremembering if it sounds right. And so I went to my in-laws' house, and I had been trying to call my mother-in-law because, like I said, she has unfortunately a lot of experience helping people with cancer because of her mom and then friends that she's had. So I went there to talk to them first. And it's crazy that they let you drive after something like that.
How has it been treated? Like, how is it doing now?
Now I'm in remission. Thanks to wigs, I look like I have hair. It's still coming back. I had chemo, radiation, a double mastectomy, and reconstruction. And I'm on hormone blockers now, but everything is good at the moment. So,
Wow, that is mouthful of treatments. And wow, thank you so much for sharing. I follow this person on Instagram that he's young, 25, diagnosed with cancer. And he posts like the journey every single day and he has a lot of followers. But he even like selfie or his girlfriend takes video while he's doing the chemotherapy and then losing hair and stuff. I can't believe that he's like, oh, I'm really sick. And I'm like, I can't believe he's just posting it openly, but people follow and then comment.
yeah.
And they have a PO box set up, and I apparently like people sending so many gifts.
No.
He's only
Wow.
like 25, yeah, so pretty
Yeah.
young. And then you can see the journey from he was the day that he got news about his
Mm-hmm.
cancer diagnosis, and then all the way till I think he's like a third chemo right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it just like unbelievable, like the strength that he has. And then the sentence that you just mentioned about that's in like a few seconds, the people don't realize like what is that, like what it is like. um yeah, so can you tell a little bit more about like the chemo and then remission, like what was the process like?
Yeah. So, boy, there's a lot there. So I didn't share it on Instagram, but I was pretty open with sharing my story on my Facebook page, like my personal Facebook page, because again, it's just, I've always been somebody that learns from example. And I feel more comfortable when I have information. Some people would prefer not to know, but I feel more comfortable when I have information, and I like learning from watching how other people go through things. And so at first I was very much ticked off and confused. I said that I had the phrase, what the F, going through my head on repeat for probably like 72 hours, trying to just like process this shock, because it really was a shock. I was very healthy. I have always exercised. I eat well. I take care of myself. I, at that point, had been really trying hard to take care of my personal stress level and like manage my emotions for 6 years, because it was 2016 when I had the burnout breakdown, and this was 2022. And one of the, reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I learned so much from the breakdown that helped me to be able to go through this whole cancer process. So, I got my official like biopsy diagnosis on April 5th of 2022. And then you just wait. It's crazy. They send you this big packet of information in the mail, and they set up appointments for you as soon as you're diagnosed. And then the only things that I had coming up, I had an MRI, and it was just a breast MRI. They didn't look at anything else. And then I had my very first oncology appointment, which was 2 years ago yesterday. And that was really how it starts, because really they don't know a whole lot at that first, from the biopsy. They start, they test the tissue and figure out like what subtype it is, and how it's, but I don't think they really can do staging from the biopsy or the mammogram. I think they wait to really stage from the MRI, because that's when they get more information. And yeah, so it was really just kind of a whirlwind. We waited to tell the kids until after we knew for sure. So that first weekend was pretty brutal, because it was Thursday when I had that diagnostic mammogram, and then they set me up for the biopsy on Monday. So we got the call Tuesday with the results of the biopsy. And then that was when we told the kids, because we didn't want to tell them if it was false. And my husband was holding out hope that it was going to be. And I was pretty sure that there was no chance that was going to happen. But I remember just thinking that I wanted to get to the point where I could feel like I had some control, because really you just immediately feel completely out of control of the whole situation. And yeah, so I just needed to get to a point where like I knew how I wanted to conduct myself through the process. And that for me was a really big one. I wanted to appear like I was going through all of this and like from a position of strength. And I wanted my kids to see me as, doing what I needed to do to get healthy again, and also to be managing my emotions through it all and not be at the whim of what was happening. And luckily, all the coaching tools really helped me a lot with that. So you asked about chemotherapy. I mean, it's weird. So I had a port placed. My probably not going to show up, but my port scar is right here. And I had a port placed on May 16th, 2022, and I had my very first chemo on May 19th. And you really don't feel anything when it's happening. It's kind of strange. It's so, and I guess that's the good part, like not feeling things is a good thing. So I did have a reaction to my first one, which is relatively common. They are poisons after all. And so I had a reaction to my first chemotherapy, and they were going to, so normally what they do after they give you that first one, they do it really slow and see how you react. And if you react fine, then the next time they'll do it faster. But because I had a reaction the next time and all the other ones, they slowed it down. So I would have to be at the hospital at like 6:30 or so in the morning to have labs drawn. and then an appointment with my oncologist, and they would talk to me about how things were and do an exam, ask me how I was feeling and side effects and all that jazz, which the very first one, obviously there really aren't anything going on. And then they order the meds for the day, and you wait and go into infusion. And they hook you all up and put you through the courses, give you all the pre-meds that are supposed to make it easier on your body. And my biggest piece of advice for anybody that's going to be going through chemo is to really keep a journal of how you feel. I think of all the things I did, that was the most helpful, because I kept a journal so that I would know what I wanted to ask my doctors in between, because my infusions were 3 weeks apart, and you forget a whole lot in 3 weeks. So, like, once you're feeling better, you kind of like forget what was going on. And so I kept track of like how I felt each day, what sort of side effects I had, and that let me know each round where, like, when to expect to start to feel better. So it gave me that light at the end of the tunnel, which I think is the biggest thing that you need in those situations. It's like, each round I had 6 of chemo, a full year of other infusions, but 6 of chemo. And after that, it was easier. So, each round down was just one ticked box off of the list of treatments. And that was pretty helpful.
Well, Heather, thank you so much. And you shared a little bit of tools, but let's dive into the second question, which is
Yeah.
the tools that you use to overcome. I know you mentioned a little bit of a journal, but this is my best part of the podcast that I love, is the tools that people share. Because this is not from internet. This is from actual guests that I had. You're my 145th guest. That I really appreciate if some of the tools that you used actually that worked to combat all these adversities. What would you say some of the best tools that you can share with our audience?
Definitely. Yeah. It started for me with this, like, right at the beginning. So, I mean, I've talked a ton about therapy. That's definitely, I think, a tool that needs to be utilized if you're in a position where you need to get to therapy right away. A coach certainly can help if you're not at the point where, like, you have to know that line, right? This is the line of, I just need to talk about it with somebody who can help me sort through my feelings, or like I'm in more of a crisis mode and need a therapist. Like, I need to, you have to have that line. And I totally respect that line as a coach, because like I said, I'm a big advocate for both things, care therapy and coaching. I When I was in waiting for that mammogram, and I had, the tech had done their thing, and then they went back and talked to the doctor, I started right in that moment. I was doing breathing exercises because I could tell that something was different. Um, it had been a long time, and I remembered how it had been the first time. And so, just that worry and concern, I was trying to keep myself calm. And so I was doing breathing exercises box breathing is one that I love, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, wait for 4, 4 counts. And I found that really helps a lot. So that started right away. I had never had an MRI. So when I had that MRI, that was pretty scary for me. There were a lot of firsts for all of this. And I was worried about, like, being claustrophobic in the machine and, all of that, because I had no idea how I would react. So just anything that would calm my mind during that time was huge. Just like trying to stay in control, think about what I could control, which tended to just be my breathing, and what I was thinking about, naming my thoughts. That was a big one. Actually naming my emotions too. So, like, as I was journaling, I was asking myself, like, why am I thinking about this? Like, what am I worried about? obviously the worst case scenario, and it's pretty bad, when you're thinking about something like that. And, you know, what's going to happen before that worst case scenario. And just remembering that this was probably the biggest one that first weekend, was realizing that the only thing that had changed about how I felt right then was that I had different information. Like, everything that was going on had been going on before, I just didn't know it. And so I knew it now, and I could either freak out because of what I knew, like I gave myself that space to have my freak out, like, because I had to catch up with all of that information, right? Like, it is a shock to get that information for sure. And not stomp it down. Like, everything I had learned from therapy and to be a coach told me that, denying my emotions wasn't going to help me at all. I needed to actually acknowledge them and think about why I was feeling that way, and then realize that I could choose something different if I wanted to. And I think that's the part that a lot of people forget, or just aren't aware of. Like, I remember I didn't realize that I could actually choose how I felt about something, because everybody reacts differently to different situations, right? So everybody has different emotions from learning information. So realizing that I had that power to choose how I wanted to act. Um, Lots of meditation, definitely a lot of meditation.
Thank you so much. I'm writing down on the YouTube and then our Facebook page of some of the tools here.
Yeah.
But naming emotion is very important and interesting because sometimes when you're going through the PTSD, it's so overwhelming and
Mm-hmm.
you just don't know. And then it's almost like coloring, identifying, am I scared? Am I frustrated? Am I like, where am I right now? Um,
Right.
I think also when you are dealing that with children, um, myself too, but instead of people like trying to fix it and then say, hey, do this, do this, do this, like acknowledging and repeating it back. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
you say, if somebody said, I'm scared. And then instead of, oh my gosh, what can I do? Call 911. No, you would say, oh, you are scared. I hear that you're scared.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a validating, but
Right.
really categorizing it like drawers, like it's very hard technique, especially when you are in that mental stage of panic.
Right.
And I like the box breathing as well, but sometimes when it's like a super panic situation, it's just hard to remember.
Yeah, it is hard to remember what to do in those situations. And I think that's why it's so important to have some sort of meditation practice, even when you're feeling well, because that is what trains your brain to realize that this is a tool that you do have in your toolbox, to use when those things come up. So, one of the things that I talk to my clients about is just like having those tools and having things that you can use in the moment. And I think that mindfulness for me is a pretty big one. I find that mindfulness as like a meditation practice is the easiest to do in the moment, because you can calm your brain down from that like hyperactive mode where it's like spinning out of control. We all know that feeling that we always call like spinning, or like racing thoughts. I think that all comes back to the same thing, like the overwhelm of just so much going on, and you're worried and you're just jumping around from one thing to the next in your brain. And mindfulness pulls that all back and makes you focus on one thing at a time. And so, like, naming the emotions is, I feel, a form of mindfulness. And then also, it's just something that you can do in the moment, no matter where you are. Like, I'm sitting in my living room right now, And I'll look around the room, and if I'm finding that my brain is bouncing all over the place, I will start naming things like, okay, I can see the pink rose that's right there, and I can see the map on the wall, which actually I was going to mention to you. I didn't realize that you were Japanese until I was listening to one of your other podcasts. And that was how my husband and I met. Was we were in a horticulture class, a horticultural design class, and we had a project where we had to draw something, and we drew the Katsura Imperial Palace. And so I have that framed on my wall. The very first project that we did together. So yeah, it's like naming those things and just letting your brain calm down. And I find that that is a really helpful way to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's so important that um, people recognize, first of all, what's going on, of all the things that you had to go through. And I'm very sorry. And I'm very glad you're here. And I'm very happy that you are tackling it with so many knowledge and tools that you learn to overcome, but also applying it for your coaching business, and then helping other people coming on my podcast and having this conversation. I really appreciate it.
I hope it gives someone some hope and strength.
Sure. My last question is a gift that came from the adversity. So Heather, what would you say to our audience? What's the gift that came from your adversity?
Hmm. Yeah. So, uh, from the burnout, definitely the gift that came from that was wanting to learn more about my brain and the brain in general, how we handle things individually. Everybody definitely handles things differently. And all of the coaching tools that I learned, I know for a fact that if I had been diagnosed with cancer in 2016 rather than 2022, it would have been a much harder process for me mentally. Everything that I learned from that burnout experience was massively helpful for me in going through all of my cancer treatments. And when I would be in the support groups that I participated in, I would see the value that I had from those tools that other people didn't have. Um, they just had a much harder time with processing things. They didn't know how to process their emotions. And so I really tried to give people some guidance for ways that they could process through that information and the situations that they were in. So passing along those tools definitely is a passion of mine. And from the breast cancer, the adversity that turned into a gift for me then was really just the knowledge. I'm somebody who's dealt with imposter syndrome for a long time. I think many of us, I think everybody does. Everybody feels like an imposter at some point in time, especially if you start to try to um, turn things around and use your past as your platform. And that was definitely what I was doing from the burnout to my financial coaching practice. And now that I've expanded to helping women, find more fulfillment and joy. So on top of financial coaching, I do that as well, more of happiness coaching and resiliency. The gift from my breast cancer journey was really the proof of concept. I was able to see that I had created a life for myself that was financially resilient. I had great habits that helped me get through COVID and then helped me get through my cancer journey, because there was a lot of time that I couldn't work during that time. And financially, I had created a very firm foundation for us, and we were in good shape to be able to miss out on that income that I wasn't bringing in anymore, because I didn't have, disability insurance for myself. So when I wasn't working, I wasn't getting paid. And And then just realizing that the tools that I had were really helpful for people and they helped me. So if they helped me, then they can help other people. And it was the gift in that really was just more confidence in my own capabilities and the fact that I have something to offer people that is beneficial and can help them live a better life, which is my goal.
Well, thank you very much, Heather, for coming to A Gift from Adversity today.
Thank you for having me, Juri. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you to our audience for listening to another episode of A Gift from Adversity. I have more guests coming in, so stay tuned and thank you again and have a great day.